Hey everyone, I'm Kerlunkus, and today I'm taking a look at the True Horror Stories subreddit in hopes to find some chilling experiences that are allegedly true. These stories are my picks and are in no random order. Without any further delay, let's begin reading these stories. Spoke with a woman after she died in a car crash miles away. I've been in law enforcement for over 16 years in Texas, and have seen more than my fair share of tragic, creepy, and downright unexplainable things on the job. From murder scenes to suicides to fatality accidents, sometimes a place just feels different. I've posted here before about a burglary in progress call I responded to, but here's another encounter that still sticks with me. I may have shared it before, but I figure it's worth repeating for everyone. There was one call I went to, a death notification, that really freaked me out. I had to contact some family members of a deceased woman that was involved in a fatal car accident a few miles away from her home. When I arrived, I met a woman near the roadway just inside the property gate. She said she heard me coming from miles away. I asked her if she lived at the residence, which she confirmed she did. After asking her to speak with me at the house, she agreed, but said she needed the walk as the house was about 75 yards from the road. After making it to the house, I approached the front door on a small wooden porch and began scanning the driveway for the woman. It was about 1 a.m. and completely dark. While looking for the woman, the front door opened and a younger woman appeared. She was concerned about my presence and asked if everything was okay. I asked if I could speak with her and any other adults inside, and she welcomed me in. I told her I would wait for the woman I met near the gate, and she told me nobody else should be home. I then freaked out and began searching the property. Nothing. After entering the residence, I told her and her husband the news about Susan, which ended up being her mother. She said her mother moved in a few months back after her father had passed and wasn't handling it well. While she and her husband were comforting one another, I began looking at photos on the wall. There was this picture of a middle-aged woman that stuck out to me. She was a younger version of the woman I spoke with near the gate. While looking at the picture, the daughter confirmed that was her mother, the woman that passed in the wreck. I spoke with the ghost of the individual that died in the crash just before telling her family what happened. This experience and many others prompted me to start sharing stories like these from the job. If you're interested, I've got a video about this and similar stories from fellow officers on my YouTube channel, Policing the Shadows. The Tokyo Pink Room Lady. Context. This is a real story of probably the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I was serving a Mormon mission at the time in Tokyo, Japan. If it weren't for the fact that I experienced it with another person, I'd probably just think I hallucinated the whole thing. I'm not a super big believer in the paranormal, and I don't think that's what happened here either, but I have a hard time wrapping my head around this one. This takes place about 10 years ago while I was doing some missionary work in Tokyo, Japan. I was a Mormon at the time, and as is custom in the Mormon church, when I turned 18, I submitted my mission papers and was called to Tokyo. Mormon missions are 2-year ordeals, whereas you are assigned to a random location in the world, told to learn the language they speak in that area, and tell everyone you meet about Jesus. While I no longer hold to the Mormon faith, I will always be grateful for the adventure that was my 2 years in Japan. While you are on a mission for the church, you follow a strict regimen and are assigned a companion that is to be your proselytizing peer during the course of your time in the field. While in the field, you are assigned to different areas as the mission president sees fit. At the time of this story, I was assigned to the Kichijoji area near central Tokyo. It was early fall and the leaves had just begun to change color. My companion and I had hit the streets hard ever since I had transferred into Kichijoji. Kichijoji is a beautiful district in Tokyo, and I believe has won multiple awards for the most desired place to live in Japan. Its maze of alleyways and hole-in-the-wall ramen shops mixed with sprawling parks and trails give it a naturally wondrous atmosphere. Kichijoji was a small area within our mission, but densely packed. You could get lost in that place, and that was the situation we found ourselves in the day we met her. I was on splits with another companion that day. Basically, splits is when you swap partners for a day with another pair of missionaries. My partner that day was an enemy of mine in the early days of my mission, but we had resolved our differences and become almost friends when we set out for splits. Looking forward to change of pace that splits could provide, we decided to do something a little different than our normal preaching. That day we decided we would try to find an inactive member of the Kichijoji congregation, someone who had been coming to church steadily for a while but then fell away for one reason or another. All we had on the person we were trying to find was a name and address. The address was located in a town a few stops down from us on a weird smaller train line that we almost never used. Once we arrived at our stop, immediately the vibes in that region were off. The normally busy and bright atmosphere of Kichijoji had fallen away and given rise to empty streets and rundown buildings. Nevertheless, we pushed on. As you may expect of two foreigners, though, wandering through a dense city, we almost immediately became lost. A few strange occurrences happened to us as we tried to right our bearings that I won't go into too much detail about, but I'll just list off to give a vibe of what this area was like. First, we talked to a lady from Turkey that owned a small cafe that claimed her brother had run off back to Turkey to settle a blood feud and never returned. She also believed that a giant celestial peacock rules the world and will one day kill all the unbelievers. Second, we were startled when a man in full surgery gear ran out screaming into the street covered in blood from what I believe was some sort of veterinary office. Upon seeing us, though, he stopped, immediately composed himself, and turned back around into the building. Finally, we stopped a somewhat normal dude who offered to show us the way to the building we were looking for. I say somewhat normal because I swear the dude was Batman. When we finally arrived at the place and turned to thank him for showing us the way there, he had vanished, full-on Batman style vanished. I don't know, he probably just walked around a corner super fast or something, but he was so quiet and quick it was weird. So with the aid of Batman, we finally arrived at our destination, which is 5 concrete apartment buildings covered in ivy and moss with a rusted chain-link fence around it. The place looked straight out of The Walking Dead. My partner and I were somewhat surprised by the state of the place, even for the general disrepair of the area. As soon as we walked into the first hallway, though, we realized we had probably come all this way for nothing. The lights in the hallways of the building were out, so the only light coming through was from the moss-covered glass that had lined one side of the hallway on each floor. Each door in the hallway of the building has a small window to the left of it, and our hearts began to sink as we walked past the first few. Through the windows, we could see that the floorboards and the walls in almost every room had been ripped out. A thick patch of black mold clung to everything within the building's interior, and at this point we realized the place is probably condemned. We head back down the stairs at the other end of the building, and as we are descending we start to hear faint sounds of classical/instrumental music. We both look at each other, neither of us having any idea what the source is. We descend further, and as we reach the bottom we find the source of the music. The window of the last room at the end of our side of the hallway is open, and a light is on inside. We approach. To reiterate, we haven't seen a single soul in this entire building up to this point, but we were about to meet the building's only resident. Nothing could have prepared us for what we saw next. As we look through the window, we get a solid view of the kitchen, and everything is pink. I'm talking hot pink, Barbie pink, neon flamingo pink. And when I say everything, I mean everything. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, the cabinets, the countertops, all pink. There's a small radio playing in the windowsill, the source of the music. There is one thing that stands out from all this pink, however. A gray metal pole with some tape wrapped on it. In various places stands from ceiling to floor in the middle of the room. A small pink stool sits behind it. The room is spotless, not a speck of dirt or mold anywhere, despite the next room down from this one being destroyed like all the rest. At the far end of the kitchen there are some sliding paper doors that give a peek into a tatami room, basically a Japanese style bedroom. In the tatami room all we can see is some large stuffed animals piled up. My companion and I look warily at each other and briefly discuss what a truly strange room this is. Then we call out a hello in Japanese through the window. A few moments go by and an answer returns in what sounds like a child's voice, but the words are completely indecipherable and mumbled coming from the other room. We call out again saying we are looking for someone who we think used to live here. Do you know if there is another building everyone was moved into? What we saw next is a bit hard to fully describe, and I want to be respectful as I believe that the person we met was incredibly disabled. Nonetheless, they were very unnerving to meet. Crawling out from behind the paper doors in a sort of crab walk fashion, we see an elderly lady with incredibly thin arms and legs, a spherical body, dressed in an oversized t-shirt or nightgown of some sort. Her eyes are slightly bulging from her face and pointed off in opposite directions. There was something almost spider-like in the way she moved, and me and my companion are completely flabbergasted. She's speaking the whole time as she approaches the pole in the middle of the room, though we're only understanding about every other word as she had a very mumbled way of speaking. Her speech style was the type a child might use, giving a further unsettling tone to the encounter. Once she reaches the pole in the middle of the room, she props herself first onto the stool, then begins to climb her way up the pole. I have no idea why or how she did this. Her arms and legs look so thin, almost just like skin over bone, yet somehow she lifts herself several feet up the pole and wraps herself around it. We are so shocked that I don't even think we said anything for like half a minute. We just stood there and might have let out a few nervous chuckles. Once we regained our composure, we asked our question again, if she knew if everyone got moved to another building. She spoke, but was difficult to understand even with over a year of experience speaking to random people every day in Japanese. This is basically what me and my companion were able to put together as we spoke with her. Everyone gone, everyone sick, something about mold. She is the only one left. We wrapped up our conversation pretty quickly after that. I'm a bit embarrassed to say, but we were both pretty off-put by the sight of a tiny elderly Japanese lady wrapped around a pole in a hot pink room. We left the building at a pace just shy of a jog. She was still speaking in a tangent when we left. We discussed it with our normal companions that night. They didn't believe us, and I don't blame them. I don't think I would have believed me either. My companion was persistent, however, about wanting to see the pink room, so we planned to go walk by the building just to walk by and see the room the day after the next. This next part is the only part of the story that I'm not really sure how to explain. I take my normal companion with me to the place and retrace our steps through the neighborhood. We pass the cafe, the vet's office, and finally arrive at the apartments. I know for a fact it was them because they were very different compared to the rest of the area. Same moss and vines, same rusted chain link fence, same building with no working lights, same mold and ripped out interiors, same kitchen windows to the left of the doors. I take him to the exact spot the pink room was 2 days prior, and it is ripped out and covered in mold like everything else. It doesn't look like a demolition crew came in, it looks like everything was ripped up and rotting over just like every other room, and every trace of pink is gone. Now I'm panicking. I take him up and down every floor in my building in that complex, and nothing. It's as though the pink room never existed. I tell my splits companion about this when I get back, and he is super freaked out. He goes looking and doesn't find it either. I text him every couple of years to make sure I'm not going crazy and all that really did happen. He always says how weird the whole experience was. Neither of us are sure what happened to the room, but we both know that it happened. Years later, looking back on it, I believe that the pink room lady was probably just an elderly disabled woman that had some relative in the area to clean up and look after her. I feel somewhat ashamed of the fear I felt towards her, as I'm sure she was probably also startled to see two foreigners stand by her kitchen window. The logical part of me knows that there must be an answer as to why the room wasn't there when we went back. I just haven't found that answer yet. This is by far the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life as of yet, though, and I reckon I'll be thinking about the pink room for the rest of my life. My one creepy camping story. I used to do lots of camping trips with a friend of mine post-college. Most of our trips were in Montana, since that was where we both lived at the time, and that's where the story takes place. My friend Jude and I used to spontaneously leave on camping road trips where we'd just pick a direction and drive until we found some cool place to hike and camp. Sometimes we'd look up trails and add a 1 to 2 day backpacking adventures to these trips. But more often than not, we would end up in an empty campground or some pull off on a Forest Service road and set up our tent right outside the car for the night. Looking back, it was wildly irresponsible because we never told anyone where we were going. We almost never had a plan, so if we had gone missing, there would have been no clue as to where to start looking. We almost never had cell service where we camped. So the creepy camping story I have happened in 2020, which was the height of Jude and I's spontaneous camping phase. I had taken a week off of work and we wanted to go up to the glacier and hike and camp for several days, which we did. Since it was COVID, camping inside the park was not allowed, so we had to find random spots to camp every night. We stayed at one campground about 180 miles away from West Glacier on the way up, then found a different spot each night closer to the park. All of our campsites near the park were between 10 and 25 miles away from each other because it was difficult to locate spots that were both legal to camp in and hadn't already been taken up by other park goers. This meant that we sometimes spent hours driving up to random Forest Service roads, looking for somewhere secluded to sleep, but we always managed to find something. Here's where it gets creepy. The first night of our trip, we stayed at a campground near Drummond, which was about 180 miles from West Glacier. Early in the morning, when it had just started to get light, I heard something walking around the tent. This campground was occupied by a few other campers, so at first I thought that maybe one of them was looking for the bathroom. The steps were heavy and deliberate, like whoever it was wasn't trying to be quiet. It was in the grass though, so I couldn't hear individual footfalls. It was more like the sifting through and crushing of grass and twigs. Whatever it was walked within a few feet of our tent, coming from the side facing the woods, not the other campsites or the road. I was only half awake, and I remember thinking two things. 1. I'm glad I made sure Jude locked the car, and 2. I really hope it's just a very bold deer and not a human. I was super tired and didn't want to think it was anything creepy, so I did my best to fall back asleep, and eventually the sound stopped. Though I don't remember them ever moving away. They just weren't there anymore. Jude had prescribed sleeping pills and was a deep sleeper, so I assumed he'd slept through the whole thing. When we both finally got up for the day, I didn't think anything of it and didn't mention it to him. The second night, we were up by West Glacier after a day of hiking and found a spot not too far from the park entrance. It wasn't a designated campground, but was within a series of dirt roads in a wooded area. We'd seen other people pulled off and camping out of their cars, just like we were. Our tent was set up right next to the car since there wasn't a lot of open space in the pull-off we'd found. Again, in the early hours of the morning, just when it was getting light, I woke up and heard someone walking around our tent. This time the grass wasn't as tall, and I distinctly heard the heavy footsteps of a person walking right next to our tent, then around the car. Again, I remember being glad that Jude had locked the car the night before. The footsteps had come from the woods, not the road, and continued moving about around our tent for a while. Then they eventually stopped without moving away. I again went back to sleep, then woke up for the day a couple hours later with Jude and didn't think anything more of it. I assumed it was someone hiking in the area who cut through our campsite as a shortcut. I didn't mention it to Jude. The third night, it took us a long time to find a campsite. It was pouring rain and we were both exhausted from a 13-mile hike. It took us 3 hours to find a place, and we finally settled on a pull-out off of a dirt road above the Hungry Horse Dam. We were both uneasy about this spot because it wasn't off a Forest Service road, and we were a little worried we'd be bothered by traffic on the road, or cops telling us not to camp there. It was remote, but not remote enough, if you know what I mean. The pull-off was kind of a little road that went to nowhere, probably used to push snow onto when plowing during the winter. It went about 50 yards into the woods, then ended with a dirt mound. There was an old fire pit and broken glass at the end of it, so we set up our tent near the entrance. It was still pouring rain, and Jude walked around in the mud in his bare feet while I kept my shoes on and examined the fire pit and broken bottles. Then we turned in for the night. I noticed too late that Jude had not locked the car, but he was asleep with the keys in his pocket, and I was too tired to get out and do it manually. Plus, it was still raining and I didn't want to get wet. In the morning, just when it was starting to get light, I woke up and heard something walking around in the woods as above our tent. I thought it was a deer at first because the steps weren't as loud as the ones I'd heard the previous morning. Then whatever it was came down onto the pull-out where our tent was and began moving around our car. The tent was set up only about 3 feet away from the car, so I could hear whatever it was very distinctly as it walked. The ground was muddy, so the footfalls were more muffled. Then I heard the car door open. I remember I'd been only half awake up until that point. I became fully alert then, but was still a little unsure of what I'd actually heard, so I didn't immediately get up. However, I kept listening. Whatever it was kept walking around near the car. There was no sound of another vehicle nearby, so whatever it was had to have walked here. As I listened, I heard the car door shut. I sat fully up at that point, waking Jude up, and said, "I'm gonna go check that out." I honestly cannot believe my nerve in that moment, but being scared, numb, and sleep-deprived tends to make me stupidly brave. I immediately put my shoes on and opened the tent. By this time, the sounds had stopped completely. Remember, the tent was right next to the car, on the same side as the woods. I would have heard someone walking away. I got out, and the first thing I noticed was that nobody was around or inside the car. It was Jude's car, and he's a bit of a mess, so no one would be able to fit in there if they weren't in the front seats anyway. The second thing I noticed was that the ground was muddy all around the car and tent, and only the footprints in the mud were from my trail runners and Jude's bare feet. I even followed his barefoot trail around to make sure that every print was his. There were no footprints coming to or from the woods. Nothing. I inspected the car and didn't find anything out of place. No signs of disturbance. I walked over to the fire pit and again could only find my own prints. Then I did the stupid thing and went past that fire pit into the woods. There, I found a weird makeshift shelter made of pallets that had some blankets and women's undergarments in it. It scared the shit out of me initially because I was pretty spooked by this point and I thought there was a body in there. But upon closer inspection, the whole thing was rained out and undisturbed. Nobody had spent the night there in a long while. Even still, I didn't touch anything and only came within a few feet of the thing before turning around. I returned to the car and sat inside it while I waited for Jude to finish waking up. Then we packed our tent and didn't mention it to each other at all that day. On the fourth night, we found a really cool spot below a dirt road on the west side of the park. We got briefly disturbed by a man walking into our campsite, but he just seemed like he was scouting out a place to camp with his family and didn't know where we were there. That evening was otherwise uneventful, and we both went to sleep early because Jude wanted to catch the sunrise. I was afraid to miss my alarm, so I woke up in the middle of the night and immediately heard something moving around outside our tent. This time, it was right behind our tent in the direction of the way we'd come / where we left the car. I remember being kind of annoyed that this thing had started up so late when all I wanted to do was sleep. Eventually the sound stopped and I did fall asleep. In the early hours of the morning we got up and broke camp before it got light. My alarm was loud and woke Jude up too. I forgot about the sounds I'd heard in the night, helped pack up the tent, and didn't mention it to him. I was pretty happy we were finally inside the locked car and were headed to our next destination though, but I've always been a tad scared of the dark. We saw a spectacular sunrise that morning. Afterwards, when we were on our way to get breakfast and coffee before heading home, Jude looked over at me and said, "Have you been hearing something outside our tent every morning?" I looked at him in shock and said, "Yes. Remember, I got up to investigate it yesterday?" And Jude said, "Yeah, that's really weird. Every morning I've been hearing it too." And we both talked about how strange it was that we both heard it, but neither had thought it important to mention afterwards. It was like, even though it was really unsettling, something subconscious had made us both think that it was nothing to dwell on. To this day, I still get shivers when I think about hearing whatever that was, and I'm still astounded by the fact that I actually got up one of those mornings to investigate it. But in those moments, even though I remember acknowledging that it was creepy, I don't remember actually feeling very afraid. And clearly I wasn't too worried because I hadn't once thought to bring it up to Jude. So anyway, that's my one creepy camping story. I would like to add that this was not the first time nor the last that I've heard something moving around the tent during a camping trip. However, this trip was the first time it was so consistent, and it's the only time I've ever gone out to see what it was because of how persistent it was. I've had nights where black bears, elk, and deer have come through the camp. I've never had the circumstances or the sudden ceasing of the sounds be so creepy. The fact that we never camped in the same place twice but still kept hearing something really weirded me out too. To this day, Jude is super unworried and nonchalant about it, whereas I almost find it more unnerving each time I retell that story. What do you all think it was? Just a series of unsettling coincidences? Or something else? And that concludes our brief little story time session. I just wanted to browse this front page of Reddit, see what kind of stories I could find. And I was mildly entertained by these. I gotta say, probably the freakiest one out of all these is that lady in the pink room thing. Because, I mean, where the hell is she and what the hell happened to the room, right? But aside from that, you know, I'm not really questioning too much about these stories. They could be true, they could be false, you never know. The strangest one is probably the very first one that we did. Because, I mean, you know, it's borderline paranormal. But aside from that, these stories were still pretty entertaining. Even that anticipation towards the ultimate shocker of nothing towards the end with that camping story. These were some pretty interesting stories throughout. I'll leave the original links to the Reddit post if you want to check them out, read them yourself. And yeah, if anybody has an issue at all with the stories being in these videos, please let me know. I'll take the video down, re-edit it, whatever. But yeah, with that being said, I'll just go ahead and call it a video right here. Thank you all so much for watching if you made it to the end. If you like what you saw, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you thought of these stories down below. And let me know if you've ever experienced anything creepy. let me know in the comments. I'd really appreciate it. It would make for a pretty interesting video. So with that, I'll just leave you all right here. This is me, Kerlunkus, and I'll see you all in the next video. I am out.